Eden is going to come around with the microphone this morning, and I just want you to share very quickly your favorite Jesus story, a one-liner. What is your favorite Jesus story? There's all kinds that come to mind this morning for me that are my favorite Jesus stories. The woman caught in adultery, the friends who tore the hole in the roof to get their friend to Jesus to be healed, the Pharisees coming at night to ask questions, and they don't want to be seen by the other Pharisees, so they come in the middle of the night and they're like, Jesus, what must I do to be born again? And those same Pharisees will take his body once he is crucified and died and bury him in a tomb. Those same Pharisees that were once afraid of being associated with Jesus now not only associate with Jesus, but take his dead body and are willing to risk being killed themselves and shamed and sent out of the temple by taking the body and burying it in a tomb. There's Jairus' daughter raised from the dead. Come on, somebody must have. Well, there's one up there, Eden.
I can tell.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm particularly fond of Jesus turning water into wine.
I particularly like that story myself. And the significance of that story, for those of you that don't know, fathers in Jewish custom would lay down wine from the day that they loved their daughter. And in that moment, a daughter finds out how much her father has loved her, and when he began to love her was when he had set aside wine for the day of her wedding. And so running out of wine was incredibly shameful, and Jesus turns so much wine, so much water into wine from a time before she was even born that even the wedding party planner is amazed at the quality of the wine and says, wow, the love that the father has had for his daughter from before time even began. What a beautiful story. There's another story where a woman has been suffering with an issue for 12 years in her life. And Jesus not only heals her, but he calls her daughter. In a time and a moment where nobody would have wanted to associate with this woman, that having touched Jesus' hem of his garment, actually pushing her way through the crowd, she made everyone else unclean. She risked being stoned, but she knew that if she got to Jesus, that she would be accepted and loved. Suzanne has one, Eden.
Okay. I like the story of the Samaritan woman who encounters Jesus at the well, and he tells her, actually, she says at one point in our conversation, she says, I'm waiting for the Messiah. You know he's going to be coming sometime. He says, I am he who you've been waiting for. And that sort of, if I'd been her, I would have been blown away, like right on the ground. Yeah. What do you mean you're him? So the story is beautiful, because I think she gets the message that he loves her regardless of what she did.
Yeah.
So it's a forgiveness, and it's a new life for her. Yeah.
Her deepest, darkest secrets that she's been trying to keep from everybody. She goes out in the middle of the day to get water because nobody else will be at the well. At noon she goes because it's a time where just nobody else, because of the heat of the sun, would be there. And she's thinking she can hide away and get the water that she needs. And Jesus shows up and reads her mail. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, well, there are too many great stories to have.
Aren't there?
It's a favorite, but one that always comes to mind for me is Walking on Water. That is
Shayla is going to be preaching on that one next week, so I'm going to save that one. But I love when Jesus feeds the stadium of people with a boy's lunch. with a kid that shares his lunch with the disciples, and they bring it to Jesus, and just a few small fish and loaves, and Jesus feeds 5,000 men plus women and children, equivalent to 20,000 people, a stadium filled with people. There's so many great stories. I love how Jesus tells the disciples to cast their nets to pay for their taxes, and they pull out the fish and take money out of the fish's mouths in the water. I mean, wouldn't that be great come tax time if you could just go out and catch a few fish and all your tax money was in the mouth? But God provides. He provides. He calmed the wind and the wave and showed his power over nature. I mean, there's just so many incredible stories. This summer, we heard stories from Blair and Aisha and Bonnie and Joan and Mady of how Jesus had impacted them today. It's not something that just happened 2,000 years ago, but continues to go on today. Jesus is continuing to see the needs of people and meet them right where they're at. We all come to Jesus for different reasons and with different needs. And I imagine that this morning you've come into this place with a need, with something that is on your heart and on your mind, and maybe even deeper than that, you have something that you're needing Jesus to meet you right where you're at. Whether it's financial and there's some type of resource that you need, or a physical need that you have, or relational, you're looking for meaningful connection, or you're looking for restoration, or emotional. You have a deep emotional need this morning that you just need met by Jesus. Or maybe it's longing for purpose. You have a spiritual need that you need met. What about your Fab Five? What about the people in your life that are closest to you, the people that we say are that Fab Five, that are the people that are closest to us, that we long to have the needs that they have met by Jesus? One of the people on my Fab Five list this morning is hurting. And I'm thinking of them this morning, and I'm thinking of the deep need that they have right now. A loss that they've suffered, that they're hurting and in pain this morning. And maybe there's somebody in your life that you're thinking, look, I'm coming in here and I've just been consumed by it all week. I've been thinking about it. Maybe it's a child, or a grandchild, or a parent, a loved one, or a friend. Something that they need met, whether it be physically, financially, relationally, spiritually, or emotionally. When any one of those areas in our life is suffering, when it's not going well, we struggle deeply. And all of them are related to one another, right? I mean, if your financial needs aren't being met in a given season, sometimes it's hard to get the physical help that you need, whether it be physio or chiro or even doctors in some nations. Thankfully, here in Canada, we can see doctors for free. But we know that they're tied to one another. We know that all of our needs, whether it be even the need to our emotional needs, are tied to our relationships. Our spiritual needs are tied to our emotional health. Our relational needs can even be tied to physical, because I got to tell you, over the last few weeks, our small group has been struggling with illness. All kinds of people being sick and away and longing to come to group and be with one another, just longing to be with one another and needing that interaction and that connection with one another. Every one of these areas of our life, when one of them is hurting, all of them suffer and struggle, don't they? And the reality is that when we come to Jesus with one need, but Jesus always addresses our whole lives. He recognizes that there are always greater needs at play than the need we're presenting with, whatever that is. And throughout the gospel stories, there are pieces in each of the stories that actually reveals that Jesus is interested in our holistic life in all 5 areas of our healing, not just in the initial need. If we had time this morning, I'd walk you through all 72 accounts of Jesus healing miracles in the New Testament, where you can actually see that in every single one of those stories, somebody presents a single need to Jesus, and Jesus looks at all 5 needs that the person has and meets them. Only we don't tend to see it in the story until we understand the Jewish historical background in the story. And so we gloss over it and we miss it. And therefore, in our care for one another, sometimes we just meet the presenting need and miss out on the holistic care of individuals around us. We fail to meet the greater need and just take care of the surface issue that's presenting itself. The story I want to look at this morning is in Luke 5, verses 12 to 15. And if you want to find it on your phones this morning, because it won't be on a screen, as long as you're not going to get distracted by social media or whatever else is on your phone, feel free to go to Luke 5, verses 12 to 15. And the story is a story of a man with leprosy in one of the villages. Jesus met a man, and Luke says, a man with an advanced case of leprosy, which just means that his condition was severe. He is quick to point this out, that he has an advanced case, which for Adrian and I, who have seen leprosy firsthand in Uganda, is a horrific disease. It's physically horrific. Your nerve endings and body begin to decay. In fact, your nose often falls off, your fingertips fall off, your toes fall off. Your body actually rots and smells. It's a disfiguring disease. It's horrific. And I'm thankful for modern medicine that has actually removed leprosy from most of the world. But there are still areas of the third world where leprosy is rampant. And with leprosy, they had certain rules within society in order to stop its spread. And it wasn't just that we had to wear a mask or be shut inside for a little bit of time. You're actually removed from your family, from the ability to work. You have to go outside of the village. You have to, you are not allowed to cut your hair or bathe or take care of yourself, because they want people to know that you're struggling with leprosy. And every time you come close to any person that might come near you, you have to scream out, "I have leprosy!" I mean, can you imagine how horrific that would be? That every time you get close to another individual, you have to yell out what your most hidden, hurting, shameful thing in your life is. I mean, I am a typical guy. When I'm sick, I like my family to take care of me. I get man colds. So I cannot imagine being separated from my family. They were separated from the temple, which means that they couldn't get close to God's presence or be forgiven for anything else. And I imagine that when they were struggling and sick, that they were also struggling in other ways. That everything in life wasn't going well. That they were struggling in all kinds of ways. And they couldn't work. They couldn't provide for their family. They couldn't give what was needed to take care of their family. I mean, does life get worse than that? Physically, your body is decaying and falling apart. I mean, most of us struggle when we have a pimple on our nose. We're like, that looks awful. How about no nos? Financially, not being able to provide whatsoever. Not wondering how you're going to make everything work, but how you're actually going to put any food on the table whatsoever. There's no contact with family or friends. You're cut off from all interaction emotionally. Spiritually, you couldn't enter the temple at all. You could never be in God's presence. And God's presence wasn't outside of the temple yet. Jesus hadn't died and rose from the dead yet, which means that they never got to experience God's presence, period. It was a complete cutting off. So, when the man saw Jesus, he bowed with his face to the ground, begging to be healed. Begging. There's a desperation going on. Lord, he said, if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. Have you ever been that desperate? Have you ever been at a place where everything seemed to be gone? And he's wondering, how will I be greeted? I mean, if he gets too close, he's going to be stoned by the crowd that surrounded Jesus by even reaching out. How will I be accepted? He felt desperate, but he felt insecure to ask. I think every Sunday, there's times where people struggle with that, when they want to come forward for prayer, but they're just feeling too insecure about it. I brought this on myself. I've done too many things wrong. Why would he care about me? Why would Jesus meet my need? He doesn't have time for me. I haven't tried enough on my own. I mean, we just come up with all kinds of excuses as to why we shouldn't come desperately to Jesus. There's just all kinds of reasons that we have that we're not going to come to him. And we wonder, can I even be healed? I mean, he must have wondered this. His body was rotting. Despite the fact that he said, Jesus, you can heal me, he knew how serious his condition was. He knew how serious it was. And he must have wondered. But listen to Jesus' response, verse 13. Jesus reached out and touched him. I'm willing, he said, be healed. And instantly, the leprosy disappeared. What does that mean? Instantly. Does that mean body parts actually grew back? Like, how did they visually see that instantly it disappeared? How does a disease that's rotting the inside of your body instantly disappear? It means body parts have actually grown back. It means that he's been restored to his original likeness. It means he's been made whole in such a way that it's obvious to everybody that's present that he's instantly been healed. And this is a doctor speaking. Remember, this is Luke. This is a physician saying, instantly, this man has been healed. His worries have been put aside. In verse 13, he was greeted warmly. Jesus touched him in a time where Jesus would have made himself unclean by touching him. Verse 13, he's accepted. Jesus was willing to heal him. His doubts are diminished because Jesus heals him. His worries are put aside. And I think that when we come to Jesus in desperation, our worries can be put aside. But Jesus doesn't just leave him physically healed, but spiritually cut off, relationally cut off, unable to work, and emotionally destroyed. Jesus wants to take it a step further. And he does this in all of the healing accounts. In verse 14, it says, then Jesus instructed him not to tell anyone what had happened. How does that work? It's like The extreme makeover has just occurred in his life. He's been going around screaming out that he has leprosy. Everybody knows, and his body parts have grown back. Don't tell anybody. How could he not tell people? Aren't people going to be like, that was the guy that was out of town that was always screaming, I have leprosy, and now he's normal? What is going on? They might have had questions. They want an explanation. But it says, continuing on in the verse, he said, go to the priest and let him examine you. See, Jesus knew that if he started telling people before he went to the priest, he would have broken the law and not been restored to the temple. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy, Jesus says. This will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed. He wants it to be public. He wants everybody to know. He just says, just wait and go and do this properly so that you can be restored physically, relationally, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. You can be completely made whole. Get your certificate of cleansing so you can work again, so that you can go back into town and show your certificate of cleansing and get your job back. So relationally, you can go back and live with your family. What's that like? After years and years of being separated from your kids and your spouse, a week's hard. And emotionally, what does that do to your inner hurts? The shame that you felt by being cut off. And spiritually, now allowed to go into God's presence again. All because of Jesus. Because of the bravery it took to desperately run to him. You may be healed of what you've come to Jesus for. But Jesus wants to ensure your wholeness. Your journey has just begun. He wants to restore you completely. Whatever it is that you've come in here with this morning, don't leave with just that one thing. Allow him to do a greater work. To get the certificate of cleansing, it says in Leviticus 14, verses 2 to 20, all kinds of things that he would have had to have done for the law of Moses to be fulfilled. But in verse 9, it says, on the seventh day, in other words, there's 6 other days of stuff they have to do, but on the seventh day, they must shave off all their hair. They must shave their head, their beard, their eyebrows, and the rest of their hair. They must wash their clothes and bathe themselves with water, and they will be clean. As if this guy hasn't been humiliated enough. As if he hasn't gone through enough. Now he has to shave off his eyebrows and his beard and his hair. But when we get our certificate of cleansing, like when we actually began to follow in the ways and the teachings of Jesus, it can be humiliating for us too. I mean, financially, when you start to get your finances under control, it can be humiliating to actually have to say, actually, I can't afford that. Actually, I don't have the money for that right now in my budget. Actually, to be a good steward of what God's entrusted me with, I can't do that right now. I have to choose other priorities. It can be really hard to financially manage and steward our money, not just 10% that we tithe to the church, but the 90%, all of what God's entrusted us with, when we steward it in the way that he calls us to. It can actually be a challenge. Relationally, to go and make amends to somebody, to actually say, what I did was wrong, and I'm sorry, and I want to restore you back to the place that you were before I damaged this if I can, and I want to make amends in some way. emotionally to go and forgive somebody. That can be humiliating, right? I mean, even admitting a need spiritually can be humiliating. It doesn't always get easier, does it, before we get better? Coming to Jesus and saying, God, I need you, is the beginning of the healing. But to walk out the certificate of cleansing of what it actually takes to get wholeness in those areas of our lives means that we may face some uncomfortable times. We may actually, in following out, but I can tell you that if you submit and apply God's word in any situation, you'll understand why afterwards. You'll always understand why afterwards. You'll always understand why it's better to live in what He's calling us to rather than trying to do it on your own. See, Jesus never said putting the pieces of our lives together was going to be easy, but He did say He would enter into the mess with us. He would be involved in the transformation of our whole lives. I mean, imagine wholeness. Complete wholeness in your life. That's what He wants for you. It's what He longs for you to experience. The passage continues, despite Jesus' instructions, the report of His power spread even faster, and vast crowds came to hear Him preach and to be healed of their diseases. Of course they did, because they saw the transformation of a life. And here, I don't know about you, but this summer when we heard Blair's physical healing story after way more than a decade of his life, having phlebotomies on a monthly basis, and then just being healed. Aisha's relational healing story that you can still watch online, that is an amazing transformation of what God did. She came to Jesus for relational healing, but Jesus has restored her physically, financially, relationally, spiritually, and emotionally. Joan told the story of spiritual healing, where Giselle had walked her through. And maybe the emotional healing or physical healing, depending how you look at it, of depression, and God's ability to heal her and restore her completely. God is still in the business of healing and restoring us in all these areas of our lives. In every one of these areas, and I wonder, what is the need you're bringing this morning? What is it that you're bringing this morning? Is it physical, relational, spiritual, emotional, financial? Is it all five? Is there a couple of these that you're just like, they're all so interconnected to one another, I don't even know how I'd start to break them apart? He wants to heal you this morning. Instantly. And then for you to begin to walk out your certificate of cleansing.